Are you more concerned about being right or righteous? Again, are you more concerned about being right or being righteous? I'm talking about that today, sorta, in this edition of Connecting Faith and Life. Thank you for joining for this episode of Connecting Faith and Life. I'm your host, Mr. Brown. And like I said in the opening, I'm going to talk about this idea. Are you more focused on being right or righteous? Now, I'm not going to talk about it in this format. I'm going to share two things with you. Number one, a podcast about a sermon I gave at my church, VC Family Church. And I'll come back after you listen to the podcast and kind of give you some thoughts about it. I think it's an interesting podcast. But I was able to preach at my church on a couple Sundays ago, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity. So thank you, Pastor Travis, for trusting me to bring the word of God to our family, and I really enjoyed it. And like I said in the sermon, at first when he asked me, I'm like, nope, I'm good. I looked at the passage. It was a long passage. I'm like, no, I'm good. I don't want to do that. But I was reminded of something that's in my studio right there, and something I teach kids all the time. I can do hard things. I can do hard things. And so I did the sermon. I'm grateful for the opportunity, even though I was so sick. I was sick. I wasn't sick when he asked me, but right the day before, I was up to 2:30 in the morning, coughing, hacking up stuff. But thanks be to God, I'm grateful that I only coughed like twice in the third sermon. Like God just protected. And after I was coughing, in between I was coughing. But I mean, I'm just grateful. I prayed and asked God to help me through the sermon, and he did just that. And I'm going to talk about that in the sermon too, the idea that sometimes we pray for the big stuff, but not small stuff. Like I was sick, and I'd been sick for a couple of days and never even said, God, can you help me? I never brought that to God because you know what? I got NyQuil, I got Sudafed, I got meds to take care of me. But even though I may use meds, I need to always see God because like I say in the sermon, there's only one source. Everything else is a resource. And so I need to make sure we call on God. And in the sermon I gave, Paul called on God several times through his shipwrecks, through the storm shipwrecks, even after the shipwreck. He's a model for us to keep focusing on the Lord and not focusing on ourselves. Anyway, so I'm going to play this deep dive podcast for you where they're talking about my sermon, but I'm also going to leave you a link to the sermon in its entirety and the link in the description. You can watch it on YouTube. If you do watch on YouTube, please take a moment to like it on YouTube. That teaches the algorithm to put it out to the other people because you like it and watch the whole thing. But if you don't like it, don't like it. But if you like it, please take time to like it. Also, you can check it out on our app and on our website as well. And this, like I said, this podcast about my sermon is very, very interesting. So after I play it, I'm going to come back and talk a little bit more why I think it's interesting, not just because of the content, because of the delivery. So check it out. Deep dive on my sermon, which I think is interesting. On Acts chapter 27, verses 1 through 28, verse 10. Here you go.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something, that I think a lot of people find relatable. Those shipwrecked moments in life when it feels like everything's going wrong. And we're going to be diving deep into a sermon by Mr. Brown, who uses the story of the Apostle Paul's shipwreck from the book of Acts to kind of explore this whole idea.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how, a story from thousands of years ago can still offer guidance for navigating the challenges we face today.
Exactly. And what's great about Mr. Brown is he doesn't just, tell the story. He really brings it to life in a really engaging way. I mean, who else would think to use a broom to illustrate a point about faith? But we'll get to that later. First, can you set the stage for us? What's the context of this sermon?
Absolutely. So the sermon is based on this biblical account of Paul's journey to Rome, where he was being sent as a prisoner. And this wasn't like a quick trip. This was, months at sea. Multiple ships. Facing all sorts of dangers and delays. Mr. Brown really emphasizes how different this was from our modern travel experiences. There were no in-flight movies or Wi-Fi to distract you from a potential shipwreck.
Oh, man. Can you imagine being stuck on a delayed flight for that long, let alone facing a potential shipwreck? I'd be reaching for that emergency exit before we even left the gate.
I hear you. And get this. Even back then, there were warnings about traveling during certain seasons. And Paul being, kind of a seasoned traveler, he actually cautions the crew about the dangers of setting sail when they did.
Oh, really?
But yeah, they kind of brush him off. They think they know better. Of course. Okay. You can probably guess what happens next.
Oh, I can definitely see that I told you so moment coming a mile away. It's human nature, right? You want to gloat a little when you're proven right?
Right. That's where Mr. Brown makes this really insightful point. He talks about this difference between being right and being righteous.
Okay.
So you see, While Paul might have felt justified in, kind of rubbing it in their faces, he chooses a completely different path. He chooses to be righteous.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So what exactly does that look like in this situation? How do you go from "I told you so" to righteous?
Well, think of it this way. Being right is about winning an argument, proving your point, maybe even feeling a bit superior. But being righteous is about choosing like a higher path. It's about acting with integrity and compassion, even when you have every right to say, "I told you so." So in Paul's case, instead of gloating, he actually focuses on encouraging the crew and keeping their faith alive amidst, all this chaos of the storm.
So he's basically saying, okay, we're in this mess now, but let's work together and focus on getting through it.
Exactly. And what's remarkable is that even though he's a prisoner, Paul ends up becoming this source of strength and guidance for, everyone on board. He even goes so far as to give thanks to God for food before there's even a morsel in sight.
Wow, that's a powerful image. Giving thanks when there's seemingly nothing to be thankful for. It reminds me of that famous saying, gratitude turns what we have into enough.
That's a great connection. And what's really fascinating here is that Mr. Brown actually delves into the psychological impact of choosing gratitude in these really dire situations. When we choose to focus on what we are grateful for, even amidst all the chaos and fear, it actually shifts our perception.
So it's not just about being polite or putting on a brave face. It actually changes how our brains process the situation.
Precisely. And this brings us to one of the most memorable parts of Mr. Brown's sermon, the broom illustration. You kind of have to see it to believe it. He literally uses a broom to demonstrate how our focus impacts our ability to handle these difficult situations.
I was wondering when we'd get to the broom. Tell me, how does a simple household object become a metaphor for facing life's storms?
Well, it's brilliant in its simplicity. So Mr. Brown asks for 2 volunteers to try and balance a broom in their hand. First, while looking down at their hand, and then while looking up at the top of the broom. And of course, it's much easier to keep the broom balanced when you're looking up. Right, so that's the whole point. Where we choose to focus our attention during tough times makes all the difference.
So if we just fixate on the problem, on the storm right in front of us, we're more likely to lose our balance, literally and metaphorically. But if we shift our focus upward to something greater, we gain a sense of stability and perspective.
Exactly. And Mr. Brown really drives this point home when he says that there's only one source, everything else is a resource.
That's a powerful statement. It's so easy to get caught up in, trying to control every aspect of our lives, to rely solely on our own resources. But what he's saying is that ultimately our strength comes from something beyond ourselves.
Right? And that's where faith comes in. It's not about, just being passive or denying the reality of the storm. It's about recognizing that even in the midst of all this chaos, there's a higher power at work.
This reminds me of something else that Mr. Brown talked about, how even Paul, this incredible apostle who performed miracles and spread the gospel, he still went through these incredibly difficult trials. It's kind of comforting, actually, to know that even the superheroes of faith face challenges.
Absolutely. And Mr. Brown uses Paul's experience to highlight a really important point. Trials are an inevitable part of life, even for the most faithful among us. In fact, he goes so far as to say that trials are actually necessary for spiritual growth.
So it's not about avoiding challenges altogether. It's about learning how to navigate them in a way that actually strengthens our faith.
Precisely. And he uses a really relatable anecdote to illustrate this point. He talks about a time when he got sick. Just a minor illness, nothing too serious. But he got so caught up in treating his symptoms that he actually initially forgot to even pray about it.
I think we've all been there at some point, so focused on fixing the problem that we forget to turn to a higher power for support.
Right. And it's this humbling reminder that we all need that connection, that reliance on something greater than ourselves, no matter how, capable or strong we might feel.
Speaking of relying on a higher power, let's talk about what Mr. Brown calls descriptive versus prescriptive passages in the Bible. It sounds a bit technical, but I think it's a really important distinction. Can you break that down for us?
Of course. So think of it this way. A descriptive passage is like a news report. It simply tells us what happened, like a historical account of events. But a prescriptive passage is more like a recipe. It gives us specific instructions or commands to follow.
Okay, that makes sense. So how does that apply to the story of Paul's shipwreck? Are we supposed to take every detail as like a literal instruction for our own lives?
That's where Mr. Brown offers a word of caution. He says that while we can definitely learn from Paul's experience, we shouldn't necessarily expect the same exact outcome in our own lives. Just because God protected Paul from a shipwreck, and as you'll see in a minute, even a snake bite, doesn't mean we should expect that same kind of miraculous intervention every time we face a challenge.
So it's not about expecting a specific outcome, but rather focusing on the underlying principles and applying them to our own situations.
Exactly. And what are those underlying principles? Well, that brings us to the core message of Mr. Brown's sermon, the prescriptive element, if you will.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the takeaway message that we can apply to our own lives, even if we're not, experiencing shipwrecks or snake bites on a regular basis?
The core message is about choosing faith over fear, focusing on God as our source of strength and guidance, and trusting that even in the midst of storms, He is working for our good and for His glory.
It's interesting how Mr. Brown kind of weaves that theme of focusing on God throughout the entire sermon. It's not just a one-time mention. It's like a recurring reminder to shift our perspective, to look beyond the immediate circumstances and see the bigger picture.
And it's that shift in perspective that allows us to tap into this source of strength and resilience that we might not even realize we have. Remember Paul giving thanks for the food before it even appeared? That's a perfect example of how choosing faith can transform our experience, even in the direst of situations.
Speaking of dire situations, there's another part of the story that I've always found so intriguing. The part where Paul gets bitten by a poisonous snake after they reach the island of Malta. Talk about adding insult to injury.
Oh yes, the snake bite. That's like a whole other layer of drama in this already epic tale. The islanders initially believe that Paul is like a murderer, cursed by the gods, because he survives the shipwreck only to be bitten by a snake. But much to their surprise, Paul just shakes off the snake and he suffers no ill effects. So they then think, oh, he must be a god himself.
Wow, talk about a plot twist. It's amazing how quickly their perception of Paul shifts from villain to deity.
Right. It really highlights the power of perspective and how our interpretations of events can shape our beliefs. What's really intriguing, though, is how Mr. Brown connects this incident to God's protection and purpose for Paul's life. He reminds us that even when things look really bleak and we don't understand why we're going through certain things, God is still working behind the scenes.
It's a reminder that we may not always see the full picture or understand the reasons behind our challenges, but we can trust that there's a greater plan at work.
Exactly. And even though Paul is still a prisoner, his encounter with the snake actually ends up opening doors for him to share the gospel with the islanders. Who would have thought that a snake bite could lead to such an unexpected opportunity?
So even in a seemingly random negative event, God's purposes are still being fulfilled. It makes you wonder if maybe those shipwrecked moments in our lives aren't always what they seem.
That's a profound thought. And it highlights this theme of God's sovereignty, that He is ultimately in control even when things feel chaotic and unpredictable. It's like that verse from Romans. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose.
That's a really encouraging reminder. It brings us back to Mr. Brown's point about choosing faith over fear, about trusting that even in the midst of storms, there's a purpose and a plan.
Yeah, it really does make you think about, what shipwrecks we might be misinterpreting in our own lives. What if those moments of chaos and uncertainty are actually like opportunities for growth and redirection?
That's a powerful question to consider. It reminds me of something Mr. Brown said about how Paul actually emerged as this leader on the ship, even though he was a prisoner. His leadership wasn't about a title or a position. It was about, his unwavering faith and how he used that to encourage the other people on board. Yeah. So even in a situation where he had no outward authority, he still found a way to make a positive impact. It really challenges our assumptions about what it means to be a leader, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It suggests that true leadership often emerges not from power or control, but from this inner strength and this willingness to serve others.
Which brings us back to that key theme of, focusing on God as our source. It's not about denying the reality of the storm or pretending that everything's fine. It's about choosing to trust in something greater than ourselves, even when we don't understand what's happening.
And that trust, as Mr. Brown so eloquently argues, is what gives us the strength and resilience to face any challenge that comes our way. Remember the broom illustration. It's all about where we choose to focus our attention. If we fixate on the storm, we lose our balance. But when we lift our gaze to something higher, we find that sense of stability and purpose.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. It's amazing how a story from, thousands of years ago can still speak to us so powerfully today. It really does make you think about the storms in your own life and how you're choosing to navigate them.
It really is. It's a testament to the timeless wisdom of these ancient stories and the enduring power of faith. Mr. Brown is a real gift for connecting those ancient truths to our modern experiences in a way that's both engaging and thought-provoking.
Yeah, he really does. I especially appreciate how he doesn't shy away from those personal anecdotes, like that story about how he forgot to pray when he was sick. It's such a humbling reminder that we all need to, invite God into like every aspect of our lives, not just the big dramatic moments.
That's so true. It's so easy to get caught up in our own efforts and forget that we don't have to go through life alone. There's a source of strength and comfort available to us if we simply choose to tap into it.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what would you say is the most important takeaway for our listeners? What's the one thing you hope they'll remember?
I think Mr. Brown sums it up beautifully when he talks about choosing faith over fear. It's about trusting that even when we don't understand why things are happening, even when we feel like we're shipwrecked, there's a purpose and a plan. And that trust that faith can give us the strength and resilience to face any storm that comes our way.
That's a powerful message to carry with us as we navigate the ups and downs of life. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. It's been a truly enlightening conversation.
It was my pleasure.
And to our listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this exploration of Paul's shipwreck and the timeless lessons we can learn from it. Until next time, keep your eyes on the source and may your faith guide you through every storm.
All right, what were your initial thoughts? Did you listen to those two people talk about the podcast? Well, talk about the sermon in the podcast. I sent that to a couple of my friends last week, and one of them came back and said, "What was that?" And they were like, what was that, AI? And I was like, yep, it was AI. And it's a program where you can upload any kind of book, video, YouTube link, and it will give you a lot of notes. It will break down a note. You can ask it questions, and it will give you kind of research from the content you gave it. And it just searches these things, right? But then there's a feature you can press a button, and it will create a podcast on it. And you can interact with it. So I could press a button and ask a question, and it would answer the question. And those two, I don't want to call them people, they would start to talk about whatever I asked them. And I thought, this is so interesting. So hopefully it wasn't distracting. Hopefully you got something from it. But again, go ahead, take time to listen to the whole sermon on YouTube, on our app, or on our website. You can check it out. But I thought it was very interesting. So tell me what you thought. Leave a message. You can send us an email. You can whatever. I would love to know what you thought about the AI. I'm not so much concerned about AI taking over the world because this world is not my home anyway. But I think if I can leverage some of those things to do things for the kingdom, great. You may have a different view about it, but let me know what you thought about that. And hopefully even the sermon will help you live for God by connecting faith and life. So thank you for joining this episode, and I look forward to the next one. Peace.